The Battle of Kuttenberg. The Battle of Kuttenberg, which began in December 1421, ranks among the most significant clashes of the Hussite Wars, during which the forces led by Jan Zizka demonstrated their strength against the superior numbers of the Crusader armies. Despite the numerical advantage of the enemy, the Hussites masterfully employed battlefield tactics, especially the wagon fort and rapid counterattacks, forcing the enemy into a chaotic retreat. The victory at Kuttenberg strengthened the Hussite position in the Bohemian lands and also showed that even well-organized Crusader armies could not easily defeat the experienced and determined Hussite fighters. So sit back and listen to the story of the Battle of Kuttenberg, a conflict that had far-reaching consequences for the future of the Hussite Wars and the political situation in Bohemia and Central Europe. In the spring of 1420, Catholic Europe resolved to crush the Hussite movement once and for all, a movement that had been spreading across Bohemia since the death of Jan Hus in the summer of 1415 and increasingly threatened the authority of the Church. Pope Martin V, elected at the Council of Constance in 1417, declared the First Crusade against the Hussites on March 1st, 1420, granting the Roman Catholic Church the official mandate to eliminate the Czech heretics. At the head of this expedition stood Sigismund of Luxembourg, King of Hungary and King of the Romans, who had not only the Pope's support, but also a legitimate claim to the Bohemian crown after the death of his brother Wenceslaus IV. Sigismund hoped the crusade would strengthen his authority in Central Europe, subjugate the Hussites under Catholic control, and restore his control over the wealthy Bohemian kingdom. From the beginning, the campaign against the Hussites was a massive military operation, involving armies from Germany, Hungary, and Silesia. The Crusaders planned to strike Prague, the center of Hussite resistance, and starve the city into submission by surrounding it. Although Prague was suffering from supply issues, its defenders held strong and waited for an opportunity to counterattack. The decisive clash came on Witkov Hill, a strategic elevation from which the Crusaders could easily control access to the city. But the Hussites, led by Jan Zizka, stood their ground, and in a bloody battle on July 14th, 1420, repelled the Crusader assault. The defeat at Witkov marked a turning point in the campaign, as Sigismund was forced to accept that Prague could not be taken by force. Nevertheless, on July 28th, he attempted to solidify his claim by having himself crowned King of Bohemia at Prague Castle. This act was intended to symbolically confirm his right to the throne, but in reality, it was a political illusion. Most Hussite towns and nobility refused to recognize him, considering him an enemy of the land. After the coronation, Sigismund quickly withdrew, disbanded his army, and hurriedly left Prague, making it clear to the Hussites that the First Crusade had ended in failure. This failure led Catholic Europe to launch 4 more crusades against Hussite Bohemia between 1420 and 1431, none of which succeeded in breaking Hussite resistance. In 1421, as the Hussite Wars shook Central Europe, Pope Martin V appointed a new papal legate for the Holy Roman Empire, Cardinal Branda da Castiglione. This experienced diplomat immediately set about organizing a new crusade against the Hussite-controlled regions of Bohemia. And on April 13th, he received papal bulls granting him full authority to issue plenary indulgences and to officially call for a crusade. He established his base in German Cologne, from where he launched an extensive diplomatic and logistical campaign, sending instructions to major imperial princes and cities from whom he expected support. The leading figure of this new crusade was again to be Sigismund of Luxembourg, King of the Romans, Hungary, and Bohemia. Sigismund had faced harsh criticism for the failure of the First Crusade the previous year, and it was now expected that he would redeem that defeat. On May 25th, an imperial diet convened in the city of Wesel, where the Rhenish electors expressed support for Castiglione and collectively set the date of the army's assembly for August 23rd in West Bohemian Cheb. The campaign plan called for a coordinated assault by two armies, one entering Bohemia from the north, the other advancing from the east through Moravia. However, it was clear from the outset that coordination between the two forces was seriously lacking. While on August 28th, German crusaders crossed the northwestern Bohemian border and caused significant damage to the local population, Sigismund's forces were still gathering in Hungary and Moravia and could not provide the expected support. The northern crusaders eventually besieged the Bohemian town of Játek, and although its fortifications were modest, the defenders held their ground, and the town did not fall. Following this failure, the crusaders retreated back to imperial territory on September 2nd, marking yet another setback for Sigismund's efforts to crush the Hussite movement. King Sigismund remained in Hungary as he was engaged in important political negotiations in Pressburg, today's Bratislava, with the Duke Albert of Germany, whom he not only made his son-in-law, but also named heir to his kingdoms. In return, Duke Albert promised financial and military support for Sigismund's campaign to reclaim the Bohemian crown, support that Sigismund desperately needed. Nevertheless, it took another month before Albert's troops arrived in Moravia. From there, the Crusader armies advanced in two streams, one via Jihlava, the other via Litomyšl, toward Kuttenberg, where they were to link up with additional contingents from Silesia, Lusatia, and Kłodzko. After their experience the previous year, when the Crusaders had threatened the capital of Bohemia, Prague, the Hussites were determined not to let the enemy get so close again. They decided to confront the invading forces near Čáslav or Kuttenberg. As early as the end of October, a Hussite army led by Jan Vezda of Vichemilis set out on a campaign to secure key positions in the expected area of conflict. However, this effort met with little success. Although the Hussites attempted to assert control over the region, they failed to gain a decisive advantage, and on November 25th, their army was forced to retreat to Prague. A few days later, on December 1st, Jan Zizka arrived in the capital with his army of radical Hussites Taborites. After a short meeting with the leaders of Prague Hussites, he set out on December 8th toward the anticipated battleground. The Prague forces joined him a day later. Kuttenberg, a strategically important town, fell into Hussite hands without a fight, suggesting that some of its citizens yielded to the Hussites, while others may have posed a hidden threat. It may have been fear of betrayal that led Zizka not to remain in the town and instead to launch active operations in the surrounding area. His first move was toward Čáslav, where he reinforced the local garrison and was joined by prominent nobles such as Viktor of Kunštat and Podebrady, Hašek of Waldstein, and Václav of Strážnice. This maneuver likely prompted King Sigismund to change his original route, opting for a march via Ledech nad Sázavou instead of heading directly to Kuttenberg. Zizka, however, soon returned to Kuttenberg, where he awaited the arrival of the Crusaders, who in the meantime ravaged villages, looted towns and castles, and committed brutal atrocities against civilians, as was typical of their campaigns. As the decisive clash between Hussite forces and King Sigismund's Crusader army approached in 1421, the issue of numerical superiority was one of the key factors that could determine the outcome of the entire campaign. Although analysts of the time often disagreed on exact figures, they generally agreed that the Crusader forces significantly outnumbered the Hussites, both in manpower and in supplies. According to one of the most important sources, the Crusader army numbered around 50,000 men, including both cavalry and infantry. This figure likely represented a rough estimate of the Allied forces that had joined Sigismund's effort to conquer the Bohemian lands. Other sources, however, mention even higher numbers. For example, Eberhard Windecker, a German chronicler active at Sigismund's court, claimed that the Hungarian contingents alone may have numbered up to 80,000, with their core made up of heavy Hungarian cavalry, known for its aggressive tactics and battlefield bravery. In addition to the Hungarians, troops from the Habsburg lands joined the campaign, with the Duchy of Austria reportedly sending another 12,000 soldiers. On the other side, although the Hussites were far fewer in number, they possessed remarkable cohesion, high morale, and innovative military strategies, relying on the revolutionary use of wagon forts, firearms, and a lethal combination of flails and other improvised weapons. According to Thomas Ebbendorfer, an Austrian historian and theologian who chronicled the Hussite Wars, the Hussite army was outnumbered 3-1, meaning that Zizka's troops may have numbered around 20,000 to 30,000 men. In addition to the battle-hardened soldiers from the Taborite and Prague armies, the Hussite side had a huge advantage in tactical mobility, which often proved decisive in battle. When the early field armies of the Hussites were being formed, composed of craftsmen, peasants, and minor nobility, their commanders quickly realized that they could not confront the well-trained and heavily armed Crusader cavalry using traditional warfare methods. The Hussites thus began to search for new tactical solutions that would neutralize the cavalry's advantage while providing both protection and mobility for their own forces. The answer came in the form of a brilliant military invention, the Hussite war wagon. At first, these were just ordinary farm wagons, used to transport supplies, weapons, and the wounded. But with early battlefield experience, the wagons began to be transformed into specialized war machines. Their construction was reinforced to offer maximum protection for both the crew and the infantry behind them. Heavy planks were used to strengthen the sides, and a solid board was suspended between the wheels to block enemy fire from reaching the soldiers behind the wagons. Each wagon was equipped with chains, which allowed them to be firmly linked together, forming an impenetrable barricade capable of withstanding even the fiercest cavalry charges. In addition to defensive features, the wagons were stocked with tools like shovels, axes, picks, and spades, which allowed the Hussites to modify terrain, either to strengthen positions or to build obstacles for the enemy. This ingenious system allowed the creation of different wagon fort configurations, adaptable to specific terrain and combat situations. The Hussite field armies became so skilled in this tactic that they could deploy a fully functional wagon fort within minutes, gaining a major advantage. They combined defensive wagon positions with surprise counterattacks, using firearms, crossbows, and flails to break enemy lines. Once a cavalry charge was halted at the wagon wall, the Hussites would open a section and launch a devastating sortie, often resulting in the enemy's total defeat. As Sigismund's Crusader forces approached Kuttenberg from the west, the Hussites marched out to meet them, leaving the safety of the town through the Kujim Gate. They advanced roughly 400 meters from the town. Upon reaching the chosen site, they immediately set up a wagon fort, which had already proven to be an impenetrable barrier in previous battles, effective against both cavalry and infantry attacks. Once the defenses were prepared, the troops boosted morale with a joint prayer, and several experienced warriors were knighted on the battlefield in recognition of their bravery and valor. Meanwhile, the Crusaders launched their first assault, but instead of a standard cavalry charge, they used an unusual tactic, driving a large herd of cattle ahead of their main formation. This maneuver had a dual purpose: to shield the soldiers from Hussite gunfire and cannons, and to smash the wagon wall if the panicked animals made it that far. But the Hussites were well prepared for such tricks. They skillfully handled the advance of the Hungarian cavalry and repelled all attacks until nightfall. This initial clash remains historically unclear, as it's uncertain whether it was a full-scale attack or just a smaller prelude to the main battle, as some chronicles suggest. While the battle raged outside Kuttenberg, a tragedy was unfolding inside the town. The German Catholics, who made up a significant part of the local population, betrayed the Hussites and allowed a Crusader detachment to enter through the Kolin Gate. Once inside the streets, the enemy immediately began a brutal massacre of the local Hussite residents. Only those who knew the prearranged protection signs, signals that spared them from execution, managed to survive. For Zizka's army, this represented a catastrophic strategic loss. They had not only lost control of the town, but were now completely surrounded, cut off from supply routes and any chance of retreat. Zizka, a seasoned warrior and tactical genius, realized that their only chance of survival was a swift breakout. He likely spent the entire night preparing, ordering his men to get ready for a lightning assault. At 5 o'clock in the morning, they launched the attack and caught the Crusaders completely off guard. Night fighting was a weakness of the Crusaders, who failed to organize effectively, allowing the Hussites to break through the encirclement with minimal losses. They quickly moved north of Kuttenberg to Kank Hill, where they once again formed a wagon fort and prepared for a possible counterattack. But the Crusaders remained passive, likely underestimating the situation and believing the Hussites too demoralized to resist. Later that evening, or possibly during the night, Zizka's forces moved again. After reassessing the situation, they left their position at Kank and marched toward Kolin, the nearest Hussite stronghold. The Crusaders, convinced of their victory, made no attempt to pursue. King Sigismund even allowed his men to scatter across the countryside, looking for shelter from the bitter winter cold. Zizka wasted no time. He took advantage of the Crusaders' inactivity and immediately began gathering reinforcements. Many fighters from the Jichin and Turnov regions in northeast of Bohemia joined his forces, significantly strengthening his army. Shortly after New Year, he set out again toward Kuttenberg, and on January 6, 1422, his units appeared near the village of Nebovidi, approximately 6 to 7 kilometers from the town. The royal army was caught completely off guard by this counterattack. The Crusader vanguard hastily gathered on the heights south of the village to try and resist the Hussite assault. But the clash was swift and decisive. The Hussites achieved a crushing victory, in which a large number of Hungarian mercenaries were killed. King Sigismund, who received news of the disaster at Nebovidi shortly after the battle ended, immediately realized that further fighting would be futile. His army was scattered and without communication, which meant any attempt to defend Kuttenberg would end in catastrophe. After a brief war council, he ordered an immediate retreat. At the same time, he issued an order to evacuate all miners from Kuttenberg to prevent the Hussites from resuming silver mining and thus weakening their economic base. During the night of January 6th to 7th, the Crusaders fled in chaos. As they departed, they set the town on fire, leaving only ashes behind for the Hussites, and fled with the remaining townspeople of Kuttenberg toward Německý Brod. After extinguishing the fires and securing the town, Jan Zizka and his Hussite forces set out in rapid pursuit of the fleeing enemy. On January 8, 1422, the Hussites caught up with the Crusader army near the village of Habri, where the remnants of Sigismund's forces attempted a final desperate resistance, likely under the command of the Italian general Filippo Scolari. But this attempt ended in complete failure. The Crusaders, shaken by their earlier defeats, panicked and fled, suffering further heavy losses. The Battle of Habri thus delivered another devastating blow to the Crusader campaign, which from this point became a frenzied retreat from Zizka's army. The Hussites continued their pursuit, and that same day they reached the gates of Německý Brod, a strategically important town, and the last refuge for foreign mercenaries and nobles loyal to Sigismund. There, the remnants of the Crusader forces attempted one last stand, but the confrontation turned into a catastrophe. Many knights and mercenaries died not only in combat, but also while fleeing across the frozen Sazava River, whose ice cracked under the weight of their armor, drowning hundreds of men. Despite the tragedy, some Crusader commanders remained in Německý Brod, hoping to hold off the Hussite army long enough for the rest of the forces to escape. The Hussites launched a direct assault on the town, but their first attempt failed. The defenders fought back fiercely, and the day-long battle did not yield a decisive outcome. The situation changed completely the next day during surrender negotiations, when a group of Hussite soldiers, apparently without Zizka's knowledge, stormed the town and unleashed a bloody massacre. Not only were many soldiers killed, but numerous civilians also lost their lives. At least 12,000 crusaders died during the Kuttenberg retreat, with another 548 heavily armoured knights drowning when the ice on the Sazava River broke beneath them. The capture of Německý Brod and the victory at Kuttenberg marked the definitive end of the Second Crusade and fundamentally shifted the political and military balance in Central Europe. The Hussites realized their strength, which led them to shift from a defensive strategy to an offensive one, launching raids beyond the borders of Bohemia. Sigismund of Luxembourg lost his last chance to subdue Bohemia by force and had to accept that his claim to the crown would remain symbolic only. Europe began to recognize that the Hussite revolution would not be easily defeated, leading to further military and diplomatic attempts to break their resistance. With this victory, the Hussites entered the most powerful phase of their movement as their armies began to control more and more of Central Europe, while their enemies grew increasingly fearful of their unexpected and effective strikes. And that concludes the story of the Battle of Kuttenberg. What do you think of it? Would you like to hear more tales from the Hussite era? Are you interested in stories of other battles? Let us know in the comments.